If you'd like to sponsor an episode, you can email us at mosheweinfeld@gmail.com. In Chag Pesach, Tov Reish Tzadik Daled, the Frierdiker Rebbe related, the avodah of the Hachones to Shabbos Kodesh and Yom Tov in general, and to Chag Pesach in specific, took up by my father a very important place. Many times my father, the Rebbe Rashab, spoke praises of those who are oisek in the Hachones to Shabbos Kodesh and Yom Tov, and especially the inyanim of Pesach. The Hachones for Chag Pesach started in Lubavitch in the middle of the summer before. About 30 kilometers away from Lubavitch, on the way to Dubrovno, there was a place named Shtzerbiner, which was the place where we will bring the wheat for the Shmura Matzah. In Shtzerbiner lived a Chassidische Lomdische Yid, which was on a high level both in Moichin and in Midas Tovis. And since Chassidim are not medayek in titles of honor, so despite the fact that this Yid named Reb Zalmen from Shtzerbiner, despite the fact that he was a Baki B'Shas Bavli, and he had a lot of knowledge in Yerushalmi and in Tur, it was Baki in Zoyar and Kisvei Arizal, and in all the printed Sifrei Chassidus. Besides for that, he was a Baal Tzedakah Mefursam. Nonetheless, he was just called Zalmen Shtzerbiner. When I knew him, says the Frierdiker Rebbe, he was already 70 years old. His Hadar's Paniv is not something that could be described b'chsav. His face showed signs of gadlus hamoichin and a good heart and a yoisher nafshi. He is from the most important chasheve figures in the zichronos of my childhood. Reb Zalmen Shtzerbiner cites for the fact that it was an exact example of a chacham from the yeshuvim of the previous generation, the chachmei ha'emes and baalei midas tovos. He was one of the chasheve yungelite by the father of my Zayde, meaning by the Tzemach Tzedek, and he was from the biggest mikusharim of the Zayde, the Rebbe Maharash. I heard tens of stories from him. Those stories reflected of many types of Chassidim and Darkei Chassidus in the 4th and the 5th generation of Chassidus Chabad. When Reb Zalman used to relate a story, besides for the fact that it was very medayek in the actual story without adding any details and explanations, just the actual fact as it happened, but before he will say the story, he will first describe the place and the time of the story. That way, the listener will get a perfect description of the whole entire story with the proper context. The listeners would feel them as if they were in that place and that time amongst those Chassidim, and the listeners to Reb Zalman's stories will be able to picture as if they are actually seeing the Rebbe, the Elta Zayde, or the Zayde, whoever the story was about. Each person, says the Frierdiker Rebbe, has in his heart and mind things that were engraved, memories which he will not forget for the rest of his life. And wherever he will be, wherever the Hashgacha Elyona will bring him in the stream of life, whatever country, whatever Zviva he will be, when that person remembers those memories, it disconnects him from his mundane life and it puts him back in those sincere and shiny childhood memories. And during this hustle and bustle of life, years later, he's able to relive those beautiful, shiny days. So in the fields of Reb Zalmen Shtzerbiner, that's where we cut the wheat for the Shmura Matzah. And there was a set seder for it, in regards to choosing which field to cut it from, and also choosing which day the cutting will happen. The conditions were as follows. It needed to be a bright, shiny day. Another condition was that 3 days before the day of the harvest, it wouldn't rain. The proper time for cutting was from 12 o'clock noon until 2 or 2:30. When the time for the harvest came, so Reb Zalman would come to Lubavitch to make the arrangements, which included, since we can't know exactly which day we'll be able to cut, because you needed those mentioned conditions of 3 days without rain and a shiny day, so he will actually bring to Lubavitch a few wagons of his own in order to bring to Shtzerbiner all the people who are going to do the cutting. So they should be ready in his house, so when the right day comes, they're already there, ready to cut. Sometimes it will take a whole entire week waiting for that bright day. For Reb Zalman, this whole avodah was a big simcha, a double and a triple simcha. Number one, cutting chitim for the shmura for the Rebbe. Besides for that, he also had guests for a few days, which is something that he really liked. You had a special chush for that. And above of that all, the fact that the Zayde, meaning the Rebbe Maharash, and during my times, my father, used to actually come in person to the harvest, which is something that gave Reb Zalman chayus for a few years. From the day where Reb Zalman traveled with the Shluchei Mitzvah back to his place, and until that bright day over at the Kata Shmura Matzah, every single day when they stayed in his place, the topic of the talks throughout the whole day was all about the weather. They will look up to the sky, they will feel the wind, is it dry, is it moist in the air, and the tens of hours were spent every day all about the weather that's going to be tomorrow, the next day, what's the forecast. And every day, they were waiting for the special shliach from Shtzerbiner that will give the news that today we will harvest. The trip to Shtzerbiner, which took 2 hours, and all the arrangements around that, made on me a big impression. As a kid, in my age back then, I found in my thoughts for every event, for every occurrence, a similar story in Tanakh or in Agodas Chazal that I knew. And it's all written, more or less, in the memories of my childhood. The cutting, the threshing was done with tremendous simcha. At the same time, together with seriousness that was on everybody's faces. Everybody were wearing a gartel, wearing hats and yarmulkes. It was very hot, and they did the work very quickly. They did it like people who had a lot of experience in field work. The old Chassid Reb Zalman, which had a wide, beautiful beard and shiny savor upon him, happy-faced, had the tool to cut in his hand. He was very quick, as if he was a younger man. And you could tell that the simcha is literally making him jump. The sandals and the white socks were like flying up in the air in a spiritual way, like the feet of Naphtali going on a godly mission. Something which could only be in a person which is a Oved Elikim, that even his heels feel the big pleasure that's in the mind and the inner Ratzain and the inner will that's in the desire of the heart that's in this Avodah. Some people were cutting, some people were singing. The singing spread in the ear with a special gishmak and was heard to a very far distance. A Hadras Kodesh was spilled everywhere. The women and the children of the families who lived in Shtzerbiner used to stand from far and watch the great simcha. All of them were wearing Shabbos clothing, and you were able to read on everyone's faces that something very special is happening today. Right after the work of the harvest and the threshing, a part of the crowd, Reb Zalman amongst them, went to wash themselves, to take a shower. On the way back from the bathhouse, Reb Zalman would wear Shabbos clothing, and they started mincha. Reb Zalman himself would be the chazan, and he would daven in the Niggun of Simchas Torah, and they would not say tachnon. Oleinu l'shabeach, Reb Zalman would sing in a special freiliche tune, and for Oises Shalom of the Kadeshim, Reb Zalman waited for somebody to flip him over, as the known minhag in Simchas Torah. And if people refused to do so, because they had their eretz towards him, remember he was a 70-year-old chassid, so he would say nu, and he would wait in the stepping back 3 steps of Oises Shalom until somebody actually flipped him. And after Oises Shalom, Reb Zalman would burst out in a dance with the whole crowd. During the dance, Reb Zalman would sing the psukim which are said after Aleinu, the Altira, etc. And when he will come to the end by Ach Tzadikim Espanecha, he would perform a jump, and then he would roll 3 times back and forth. And then everybody sat down for the Seudas HaSimcha, which was prepared outside in the garden. A big table filled with milchike foods of all types, Bahar Chava. During the Suda, my father, the Rebbe Rashab, would say a Maimer Chassidus, and would verbring for a few hours with the crowd. Afterwards, the daven to Ma'ariv. My father would go to rest in a special room which was prepared for him. But the rest of the crowd would continue the farbrengen the whole entire night. The next day, they davened, and 10 o'clock, will travel back home to Lubavitch. Reb Zalman and the other chassidim would come in the evening to Lubavitch and bring with them the sack of wheat which was hung in a special room. But when Reb Zalman passed away, so this seder stopped, and we started to take wheat for Shmura Matzah in other places, amongst them also from the Chassid, the Gvir, Reb Nachman Dolinsky. We'll finish off with a Niggun and the words ומלך גיבור לא רבריבם לאובי סבונים, which ends off with ממצרים גאלתנו. You're going to hear in the end of the recording that we also sing the regular ממצרים גאלתנו because it attaches itself nicely to the end of the Niggun, but it's not actually part of the first part of the Niggun. It's two separate Niggun, meaning that this part, that is part of the original Niggun, but at the end, when we sing the famous Mimitzrayim Galtonu, that is already a separate Niggun.
ומלך גיבור לא רבריבו, ומלך גיבור לא רבריבו, ומלך גיבור לא רבריבו, ומלך גיבור לא רבריבו, ליובוי סובונים אמס, ומלך גיבור לא רבריבו, ומלך גיבור לא רבריבו, ומלך גיבור לא רבריבו, ומלך גיבור לא רבריבו, ליובוי סובונים אמס. ממצרים גאלתנו מבית אבותים פנדיסתנו, ממצרים גאלתנו מבית אבותים פנדיסתנו, ממצרים גאלתנו מבית אבותים פנדיסתנו, ממצרים אוי ממצרים גאלתנו מבית אבותים פנדיסתנו, ממצרים אוי ממצרים גאלתנו מבית אבותים פנדיסתנו, ממצרים אוי ממצרים גאלתנו מבית אבותים